came out of this office. I decided to just which, by the way, was also a star. And they all were all black and white. Everybody left. Somebody was. Did not come in. It all helped. Right.
Welcome to the February 21st Brentwood Rotary Club meeting.
Sarah, you've lost some weight.
For those that are not quite up yet, I am not Sarah Johnson. Sarah is dealing with a severe upper respiratory infection, so she's at home recovering, if you will. So I'm going to try to cover for her. I was trying to reflect at how long it's been since I've been in this role. And the way I thought of it is to give you an idea. I figured out that Devin McClendon was in college when I was this role. Well, I'm sure cutting his Friday afternoon classes at MTSU. Am I right?
If it was Friday, yeah.
We will start with the invocation by Randy Bostic, followed by the pledge and four-way test by Dick Green, followed by the introduction of our guests and visiting Rotary by Betsy, and ending up with Happy Bucks by our own Keeley Hall. So as Randy comes to the podium, I would like you to keep in your minds and thoughts Sandra Robinson, whose mother recently passed away, Molly Chatterjee, who we talked about last week, I believe is still at Vanderbilt, but is probably going to be brought back to Summerfield here at the Heritage in the next day or two. I see Rod Freeman back after surgery. Rod, good to see you back. Roger Wheelwright, it's always good to see him as he's continually successfully fighting his family. And lastly, John Stokes is again back this week. These are all heroes of ours, so let's keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Randy?
Would you pray with me, please? Father God, on this beautiful Friday, we look outside and see the sun, and it's been a little while. We're grateful for the rain. We're grateful for the change of seasons. But Father, we love seeing this sun. It just brightens our day. Father, to be among friends today having lunch, friends who are wanting to serve and wanting to be a part of this community in a little bit different way. And we're grateful for Rotary and what it does for each of us. Father, we're grateful to see Sana here, but Father, we're mindful of everything she's been going through, and we pray for her family and her. Father, for Molly, who we all love, we pray that you'll heal. And for the others that we just talked about, who are heroes and who are doing so many good things, Father, we pray for healing, and we pray for your comfort. And God, we just ask that you be there in a special way. Father, we're thankful for the food that we had today. We're thankful for your Son. And it's through his name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, four-way test, things we think, say, and do. Number one.
Is it the truth?
Number two.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Number three.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And number four.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We certainly hope so.
Settle down, children. We got some visitors to do. First of all, we have a visiting Rotarian with us today. I hadn't had a chance to meet you yet, Jonathan. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself? Jonathan Mack.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Matos. I'm out of the Rotary Club of Kent, Washington. I was actually literally driving from Huntsville up to Nashville to catch a plane back to the Seattle area today. And I figured I would join you guys here in Brentwood for your meeting. I work at a company called Blue Origin out in the Seattle area. We do rockets, spacecrafts, rocket engines, and again, in the meeting down at Marshall Space Flight Center yesterday, so I have the opportunity to join you guys. Thank you very much for your hospitality.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We have another visiting Rotarian who will soon join our club within days, and that is Jennifer Duane. You're back.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay. Bill Coles.
I have two guests today, returning from last week, Al McFarland and his associate, Adam Newman.
Jennifer Bourne. Notice I'm finding everybody.
This is Larry Creekmore. We just met this week, so I'm gonna let him tell you a little bit about himself. But he wanted to come around.
I'm originally from Bolivar, Tennessee. I'm a Vanderbilt graduate. I was a member of the Bolivar Rotary Club for 33 years. I moved to Florida in 2003 and was a member of the South Walton Rotary Club for 10 years. And my wife retired from her job at Sandusky Hilton last year, and we moved here with the 4 grandchildren. I'm back in here.
Finally, Devin McClendon.
So I was, my guest with me today, Tim Teasdale. Tim's been a friend for a little while now, and more so, he's with a company called Occupied Renovations, which is a construction company here that specializes in coming in and doing construction work in commercial environments when it's either a tight window or when the space is actually occupied. So obviously in commercial real estate, we've done some business with them. They are awesome to work with. More so, he's considering maybe getting involved with the Rotary Club and is also considering being a sponsor of our golf tournament.
Mr. President.
All right, happy Bucks time, and I'll prime the pump again this week. $1 good news is that I no longer smell like skunk, as far as I can tell.
Says who?
So now it's just my natural stink you have to deal with. The bad news, however, is that Linus is now trying to figure out how he can broadcast our live stream on a 7-second delay in case he needs to bleep over any more of my Shih Tzu jokes.
All right, who's next? Happy Bucks.
I'm happy to be back from Honduras. There were 18 of us, 15 Rotarians from 7 different clubs. We were working about 10 miles from the Nicaraguan border. This is the 10th time I've been down there. A guy named Jim Johnston, a past district governor, this was his 26th trip. We wired 49 houses for electricity that didn't have it, and we did 1 school that got electricity. So it was a good trip.
First, is Roger Green up here? I didn't see Roger on the way in. Okay, well, Roger and I had the privilege of visiting with Molly on Wednesday. And I wanted to report that she looked quite well, and we had a great visit. Her daughter, Shalina, am I doing that right? Those are doing yeah, was there. And so anyway, and I was thinking that yesterday she was going to be moved to Summerfield, from what I understood. But she looked great, and I asked her, could we tell the club that we came to visit, and she looked good, and she said yes, and she said to say hello to everybody. So wanted to report that. The second thing is, I thought I should have gotten up as a visitor, because it's been a while since I've been here. Appreciate y'all letting me come back as a member. And I would say to what I've said to a lot of people is that the friendships that I've got in this club has been really good medicine. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
So I was charged with setting up the LinkedIn page for the Rotary Club. So happy to say that's up and running. So if you are on LinkedIn, please follow the Noon Rotary Club. Thank you.
I just want to let everybody know for the 2nd year in a row, Bob has been named to Forbes Best Female State Advisor. Congratulations.
Well, after Dick's announcement, I'll just say I was also on the last 2 weeks on a mission trip. I've been to Jamaica 22 of the last 24 years. And I had the pleasure of working for the last several years with John Stokes' son-in-law, Tim Sullivan, who is a great dentist. We take a dental crew down there. I did not pull any teeth. I'm better on the construction side. But Tim and 2 other dentists were there. I think they pulled about 800 teeth over the week. So, thanks, John.
About that. Hey, I'm giving $1 to the gentleman from the Great Northwest by way of Huntsville. And you're from Oliver, right? Love it down there in the Grand Junction to the Bird Dog National Trials. Yeah. You know, this beauty of Rotary is you can go anywhere and you can look up that chapter, and I hope you feel like when you leave here that you've got friends that you never knew you had. I've done that. Been Hattiesburg, Mississippi, New Orleans, anywhere you can go. If you look up these meetings, I mean, it's kind of funny when you go in and you're like, gosh, I know nobody. But it's the beauty of Rotary. You can walk out there and say, I've got like 5 friends in there. So anyway.
Here you go.
So 5 happy months, because the invocation mentioned the sun. And in the Pacific Northwest, it's very cloudy. So, and Seattle has literally not had a sunny day in 80 days. So I'm out here, and I sat in the car for 5 minutes and just kind of soaked it all up. So I appreciate you guys for, again, the hospitality and for the sun. Thank you.
Anyone else? Happy months. Going once. Going twice. Back to you, Harold.
Thank you. Jared Tanksley has a brief announcement.
Like Bloomberg up here. Just want to give you an update. There's a few things we do in the community that most people don't know about. Thanks to the great foundation and all the help that we do, and everybody in the room does, we were able to get basketball goals approved and paid for the children's home. 3 of them, actually, permanent goals. They won't fall down, won't hurt the kids, all that. I believe I had some, So I just wanted to let you know, we are doing other things besides golf and pancakes and all that good stuff. So thank you for all your help.
Do they have those set to 5 feet for you?
That's it. Those goals are adjustable.
As if Curry could dunk it. Wow. I'd like to call on Sheila to introduce our newest member.
Yeah, really, we did so well.
Okay, I'm here to introduce Marie. Introduce Marie Swinford. She is a good friend of mine, and just a few months ago, she was saying that she's going to semi-retire her CPA business, and she was looking for things to do. So obviously, I say Rotary. Well, as it has it, there's another enthusiastic Rotarian, Gil, who also knew her. Did not know that, and he also promoted Rotary to her, and we didn't realize that until she came to the first lunch meeting. So I'm sorry Gil's not here to share this with me. But anyway, like I said, Marie's a very good friend, and she's going to be a great addition to the Rotary family.
Welcome, Marie. Hunter McCarty will introduce our program speaker. Hunter? Thank you, Harold. See, today's joke day. So I found out from Alan's talk that he met and got more friends from other Rotary clubs than he has in our own. So much for that. It's my pleasure to introduce our program today. Howard Cattell is the president and CEO of the Andrew Jackson Foundation that owns and operates the Andrew Jackson Hermitage in Nashville, Tennessee. He has held this position since November of 2008. The Hermitage opened as a museum in 1889, making it the second oldest presidential home museum in the nation and the third most visited presidential home. For 10 years prior to the Hermitage, Cattell was the executive director of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation in Virginia. The foundation is the manager of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, a congressionally designated national heritage area that preserves 10 Civil War battlefields and interprets and promotes the region's Civil War history. Cattell's career in historic preservation history began in the late 1980s when he became the assistant director of the Providence, Rhode Island Preservation Society. And subsequently, he was executive director of the Preservation Coalition of Greater Philadelphia and then executive director of the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, also in Philadelphia. Since graduate school, one of Cattell's career goals has been to work as a presidential museum. Andrew Jackson has proven to be a particularly interesting, consequential, and colorful subject. or as they often say, there's never a dull moment with AJ. In addition to being a practitioner of history, Cattell has taught courses in architectural history and historic preservation at the Rhode Island School of Design, University of Rhode Island, Rutgers University, and Shenandoah University. A Michigan native, Cattell holds a degree in urban planning from Michigan State University. His graduate studies were in architectural history and historic preservation at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. It's all yours.
Hunter, thank you very much. And thank you all for inviting me to be with you today. I'm honored. And also, it's good I can do a makeup today. I'm going to miss my Rotary Club meeting on Monday, so I have double duty. Oh, here we go. Yay. So Jackson was a consequential president, an interesting and irascible character, a complicated human being, and a major historic figure who should not disappear from the national story, contrary to what a number of people say. That's why I like to begin my presentations with two quotes. Both are relatively short. One is from a British author and historian, L.P. Huntley, who says that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And I think we have to remember that the past people did behave differently, even 50 or 60 years ago. And that for us to try and evaluate what people did that long ago based on modern day standards is really a disservice to those people. John Meacham said something similar. He said we should not look up to our historic figures, nor should we look down at them. We must look them directly in the eye and evaluate them as other human beings. I believe this is the most appropriate way to approach any historic figure. We must view them within the context of their time, not ours, and then glean from that story of them what's appropriate or valuable to us. It's hard for us to evaluate really people who were living 200 years ago, what they were facing and what the solutions were that they found, not just in the limitations of that time, but in the social world they lived in. 200 years ago in Jackson's time, people were still trying to carve out a new nation. The United States was more than 50 years old, but they were still trying to figure it out. There was no rule book. And I love to think of it in a way that they were just making it up as they went along, because we didn't have the precedents of other countries. This was still a very radical experiment in self-government. And during Jackson's time, the European nations were sitting back and waiting for this experiment to fail and for them to come in and pick up the pieces. And Americans were facing that all the time. But by Jackson's time, the nation was passing from that age of the founders, of the founding fathers, and the inspiration that people had from that to a new generation. And Jackson had a foot in both generations. He was born before the Revolutionary War and was our last president to play a role in the Revolutionary War, and our first president to be a prisoner of war. So he was of that revolutionary era, but he came of age at the outset of the Industrial Revolution, where how the country operated and what the people thought and what was driving them was more than just this idea of independence, but it was economic development, new kinds of technology, new religions. At that time, Nashville was a center for experimental religion, actually. People were moving here from the east because it wasn't so constrained by Anglicanism at that time. So a very different time, and he lived in an exciting time that isn't all that different from ours, in the same way that we're going through all these technological and economic changes, coming to grips with them today. They were going through similar changes at that time. So it was an age of great interest, optimism, and to some degree, fear. So only a strong person could have led a nation during this time of change. In honor of Jackson's 250th birthday in 2017, we commissioned a new introductory film at the Hermitage about him that's simply titled Jackson. But we got 4 leading thinkers and speakers to participate in the film. Annette Gordon-Reed, the lady in the upper left-hand corner, is a renowned Harvard historian and lawyer. And she says Andrew Jackson was the right man at the right time. She goes on to say Jackson was a rich man, a prosperous man, a powerful man, whose wealth was built on slavery, which was accepted at that time. Steve Inskeep, the man in the upper right, who's an NPR journalist and author, says Jackson climbed a ladder of success that was dramatic. I doubt that people even knew such a ladder existed. John Meacham in the lower left says, he's the author of American Lion, one of the most recent biographies of Jackson. To understand American democracy, you have to begin with Jackson. And lastly, the woman in the lower right-hand corner is Catherine Foreman Gray, chief historian for the Cherokee Nation. And she says, Cherokees call him Jackson Devil. So there is this variety of perspectives about him, but all of them are essential to understanding Andrew Jackson. So how should we see him today? It depends on the lens through which we look at him. Was he a hero? Was he a villain? Was he someone to be revered? Is he someone to be reviled? Should we honor him? Should we fear him? I would say it's some combination of all of those characteristics. And the statue you see there in the image is the statue of Jackson that's in front of the White House in Lafayette Square. There's another version of it at the State House here in Tennessee. There's one in Jackson Square in New Orleans and one in Jacksonville. So it's a well-known statue. So we need to look at Jackson through the widest angle lens possible to truly capture the breadth of this complicated man and complex man. He reflects the America of his time that was at once idealistic, avarice, ambitious, determined, optimistic, and flawed. Which brings me to the topic of my talk, Andrew Jackson, Born for a Storm. In 2015, we opened a major permanent exhibit on Jackson, and we really struggled for what should be the title of the exhibit. And after a number of months of working on it, we settled on this quote of Jackson's about himself, wherein the full quote is, "I was born for a storm, and a calm does not suit me." More appropriate words no one has ever spoken about themselves. Jackson truly was born for a storm, and if he didn't find himself in one, he would create the storm if he felt the storm was warranted. So a bit about him. He was born in 1767. His parents were Scots-Irish immigrants. He was our first president, the son of immigrants. They arrived in North America in 1765 with 2 sons. Jackson born 2 years later. His father died just before he was born, so he never knew his father. He was raised with his mother and 2 older brothers. All 3 of them, brothers and mother, died during the Revolutionary War, and Jackson was left an orphan at the age of 14 to fend for himself. He earned a law license in North Carolina, and it was the state of North Carolina that sent Jackson to Nashville when he was 21 years old to become essentially what is today we think of as the district attorney. That began his life in government and politics. He basically, what he owned was in his saddlebags and his horse. But he used his legal skills to leverage land. He got paid in land as opposed to just cash. And that began his career as a land speculator, which he pursued all the rest of his life. He, with friends, settled land in other parts of Tennessee. They founded Memphis. So he was buying and selling land throughout the rest of his life. He was ambitious to make a name for himself, and he was very strategic in making the right friends that would advance his career. By the age of 29, he helped write the first Tennessee state constitution when Tennessee became a state in 1796. He was elected Tennessee's first congressman shortly thereafter. A year later, he became Tennessee's first elected senator. and was in Philadelphia at that time. He was also elected our first, or at the age of 32, he was elected to this Tennessee Superior Court, that today we call the Supreme Court of Tennessee. So he'd had a career already in politics and elected office. So he was a prominent Tennessean, a well-known Tennessean. But it was the War of 1812 that made Jackson a national figure. In 1802, he was elected head of the Tennessee militia. Every state had a militia. Today, that would be akin to the National Guard. And being head of the state militia gave you a position or a purchase, if you will, to get to know people, voters, white men, from all across the state. And it gave Jackson a position of rank and people knowing him. He was a self-taught military person. He had no military experience before. His first foray into battle was when the governor of Tennessee sent him to Alabama to lead Tennessee volunteers and Kentucky volunteers in the Creek War that was taking place in 1813-14. The Creek War was a civil war between warring factions of the Creek tribe. The more radical side of the combat we would call the Red Sticks, and the Creeks were the faction of the Creek Indians who were more willing to work with whites, live together with whites, intermarry with whites. And there was a war going on in Alabama that was disrupting the flow of American troops to the south and to New Orleans. And Jackson was sent to quell the uprising. He won 5 major battles during the war, the Creek War. And in the process of winning those battles, he brought in, under the control of the federal government, over 10 million acres of what had been Indian land. Primarily cotton land in Alabama, West Tennessee, Mississippi. Cotton was the economic driver of the nation at that time, not unlike high-tech is today. But for the East Coast, for England, for the development of our economy at that time, cotton was definitely king. And there was tremendous interest in Americans in reacquiring and white settlement, moving from the East to grow cotton. And Jackson was the guy who made that happen. He was so successful in these battles that President Madison and Secretary of War Monroe promoted him to a major general in the U.S. Army. So he went from being head of the Tennessee militia to the U.S. Army. That's what got him to New Orleans in November and December of 1814. At that time, the war between England and France had been settled, and England said, we're going to take care of these Americans in this pesky war going on in North America. England sent its seasoned troops who had just finished fighting Napoleon to North America. They burned Washington, they were attacking Baltimore and the East Coast, and then they were going to attack New Orleans. It's hard for us today to imagine how economically important New Orleans was at that time. I mean, how many of us today think of New Orleans as Party City, where you can drink on the street all the time? And, you know, at that time, if you can picture in your mind a map, New Orleans was the place where all of the crops and everything being produced west of the Allegheny Mountains had to leave through New Orleans to reach East Coast markets or to Europe. Likewise, all the goods that people living here were importing were coming through New Orleans. If New Orleans was closed off by an enemy, it was basically going to strangle economic development here in what was considered the West. It was a vitally important city to the future of America. It's why Thomas Jefferson pushed through the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He felt that America needed to own New Orleans. And here we had the British on our threshold, ready to capture New Orleans. They would then control the Mississippi River, a vitally important city. And the federal government felt that Jackson was the guy, if anyone could, who could rescue New Orleans for us. And even there was a great doubt whether Jackson could do it. He showed up in New Orleans in December of 1814 with a very small number of American troops. He was able to put a ragtag band of a fighting force together made up of the military, Tennessee and Kentucky volunteers, Creole Indians, freed African Americans, or Creek Indians, and Baratarian pirates. And against all expectation and odds, on the morning of January 8th, 1815, Jackson and his troops defeated the mighty British Army. In fact, the results of the army were so lopsided, or of the battle, that Jackson had 71 casualties against the British 2,037 casualties in that battle. It stunned the nation. As the word moved from New Orleans up north and east, Jackson became an immediate hero. And it's hard for us today, unless you were around during World War II, to really understand the level of celebrity Jackson got. There were poems and medals being struck, poems and songs being written about him. He was just this like cult figure almost. He became so popular that within 2 years, the Tennessee legislature was nominating him to run for president. He ran for president in 1824. He won the popular vote, but lost the electoral college and was defeated in the House of Representatives when the House voted to elect John Quincy Adams president. There were a group of people here in the West, but also in the East, who felt that Jackson represented their interests, or that Jackson's popularity is the guy Jackson was the guy who could win and represent their interests in the United States. So it was in 1824 defeat, and it only galvanized those interests that over the next 4 years, they were going to ensure that Jackson won the presidency. In 1820, the election, the campaign of 1824 was bloody, it was nasty, there's nothing that goes on in campaigns today that is any worse than what was happening at that time. Jackson ran against 4 candidates. That time he won. It was a landslide. He got over 60% of the vote, even though there were 3 other candidates running. It was a huge success, but the casualty for Jackson was his wife, Rachel. His election was certified on December 3rd of 1828. His wife died less than 3 weeks later, and he believed it was his political enemies, John Quincy Adams supporters, who had killed his wife by what they were saying, and he never forgave them for the rest of his life. He knew that they killed his beloved Rachel. He went to Washington in 1829, a widower, and grabbed the reins of government. Jackson was especially concerned about our borders and protecting the borders of the nation against European powers and against Native Americans who were being used by these foreign powers to infiltrate the country. So the concerns of our borders were different than the ones today. At that time, the concern was invading countries. Today, it's more personal rights and individuals. But Jackson was elected. He wanted to see the federal government reflect the interests of every citizen of the country, not just the East Coast elite. There was the growing rise of corporations, and he saw the corporations having more interest and control and sway in Congress than the average man, and Jackson wanted to end that. He became our first rock star president, if you will. He was so popular with the average citizens. He's today called the father of American democracy. John Meacham called him our first modern president, in that he pushed back against the control of the East Coast elite, and felt that the president was equal in stature and power to Congress, and that he was co-equal with Congress. He felt himself a little more equal than Congress during that time. He defended the Union and held it together in 1832 and 33 when South Carolina was threatening to secede from the Union over tariffs or taxation. They argued about taxes back then. He saw that, or he believed, his family had died for independence during the Revolutionary War, and that him defending the union of the countries was him respecting and honoring what his parents had accomplished, his family. He also believed that the independence of individual citizens was directly related to the union of the states. That without the union of the states, they could be picked off one by outside powers, and our independence limited. So he fought that idea of independent liberty went throughout his life. He also believed that we shouldn't be indebted, and Jackson was the first and only president to pay off the national debt in 1835. A couple of years ago, when the national debt was so high in the aftermath of the recession, we had to do some repair work on his tomb. The joints were coming loose, and I know he was down there spinning and just rattling the whole thing. So he's also the only president to have an era of time named after him, the Jacksonian era, or the age of Jackson. I remember I started out saying Jackson was born for a storm, and he still creates storms. He never shied away from a conflict. He led the first populist movement in the United States. He was quick-tempered and known for his temper, which as he matured and as he advanced politically, he used his temper strategically. His opponents would try to bait him. He used his temper strategically to intimidate and to win his point. He was legendary for duels. If you Google Jackson and duels, you'll come up with a number of 103. That's ridiculous. No one in their right mind would engage in that many duels, and no one could survive that many. And actually, he wasn't that good of a shot. He was only in 3 duels, one of which he won. We have people, who are so taken by the Hamilton play, and I always remind folks, our guy won his duel. Hamilton. He was an unapologetic slave owner. He, at his peak, there were 150 slaves, more or less, living and working at the Hermitage. And he doesn't appear to have ever been morally troubled by the concept of slavery. As I said earlier, he fought fierce wars with the Creek Indians, and in 1830 he pushed through Congress the Indian Removal Act that led to the removal of the 5 tribes from the southeastern United States. That's probably his most infamous act as president, and the one that seems to be what he's remembered for the most. But the Indian Removal Act and Indian policy is incredibly complicated. And Jackson is certainly complicit in what happened to the native tribes, but there were also outside forces pressuring both him and the federal government for the removal. We hear about Jackson being associated with the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears actually happened after he was president, but the Trail of Tears has become almost a generic term for all removal that took place during that time, and Jackson was part of it. He fought throughout his presidency what's called the Bank War, when there was the second bank in the United States that basically held all the federal tax money and paid the federal bills. And the bank was buying votes in Congress to protect itself. Jackson felt that the bank was overriding the interests of the common citizen, and over a pitched battle, political battle of 6 years, Jackson destroyed the bank. And Jackson's approach to banking in this country led the policy until 1913. So 100 years, almost 100 years of that policy. Jackson vetoed more legislation than any of his 6 predecessor presidents, because he felt that the president wasn't just bound by the Constitution. You could veto bills if you felt that legislation was not morally appropriate, and presidents continue to follow that precedent today. So his accomplishments, he presided over an era of tremendous changes, as I said. The Industrial Revolution, transportation, railroads came into being during his term. He was the first president to ride on a train. It was the rise of corporations. Interestingly, it was an expansion of communications because we now had steam-powered presses. Suddenly the number of newspapers and public's access to information and communication grew exponentially, not unlike today. Religious changes and expansion of the franchise to include all white men, not just landowners. So in summary of his life, I think this is the most profound and touching statements he made. He says, I thank God that my life has been spent in a land of liberty, and that he has given me a heart to love my country with the affection of a son. And I think we can, from his farewell address as president, we can question some of his tactics, but I think this describes his motives and his deep affection and patriotism for our country. Jackson he retired from the presidency in 1838. 1837, he lived 8 more years and died in 1845. He continued to influence government until his death. As I was saying at our table, his last political act was bringing James K. Polk to the Hermitage and basically giving him his marching orders before Polk went to Washington to be inaugurated as president. For many generations, Jackson represented the possibility of the American Republic. He was the first president born poor, not from Massachusetts or Virginia. He was fatherless, but by the time of his death, and at 78 years old, he had been the chief magistrate of a rising international power and died in the grandest mansion in Tennessee. He presided over an era that saw the rise of democracy. So Jackson represented to Americans what was possible in a free society with relentless hard work, determination, and faith. So he embodies the promise of America. Again, one of my favorite quotes, when he was running for president, and a reporter went to Salisbury, North Carolina, where he had studied law. And the reporter asked a woman who had known Jackson, well, what do you think about Jackson running for president? And she said, Andrew Jackson, our Andrew Jackson? If he can be president, anybody can be president. And that's the point. So just quickly about the Hermitage, and how many of you have visited? That's great. Well, you can come back. There's always something new. We encourage you to. Just some quick statistics about the Hermitage. It's the second oldest presidential home museum in the country. It was founded in 1889 by a group of relentless women. I have a large photograph of them sitting by my desk to remember that they are breathing down my neck today. Really tired. It's considered the best preserved of the early presidential homes. It's a leading historic attraction in Tennessee, and it is the third most visited presidential home in the nation, after Mount Vernon and Monticello. But we're not just all Jackson all the time. We have a number of things that go on. We have an arts festival, and we have musical events. We have author series. We have a series called Authors in Jacksonian America. People love coming to it. We do specialty tours all through the year. And we have the duel, where you can come and participate in the duel and learn why and how men dueled. So I think of us as having brain food too, lectures about the presidency and democracy. So what we do, whoops, it's supposed to be deleted. So what we do, we provide enriching experiences for almost 240,000 visitors. We inspire and educate guests about our nation's history, and we ensure that Jackson's legacy is not forgotten. And I'm happy to answer questions.
We have time for a few questions.
Sure.
You familiar with, well, about a year ago, Tony Turnbow told us about his book. Are you familiar with that book? And
I am, yes.
what did you think of that section of his life?
Well, it was one little known. I think it forged him
It forged Jackson's reputation, especially with soldiers. It illustrates his dedication to soldiers that served under him. And you see that throughout his military career. And even in adult, or even as the president, people who were loyal to him, they had a fierce defender. Tony's book is great, it's intensely researched. Yeah.
You mentioned the dual event. Is that certain times of year, or when is that?
They run 4 days a week from March 15th through the end of November, and then through the winter months occasionally, because our attendance is low in the winter. But starting March 15th, Wednesday through Sundays.
Okay.
Sir?
All the new presidential libraries, are they funded by the government? And do y'all receive any government money at all?
The last time we got a federal appropriation, and this is the truth, 1908. But we can't be a federally funded residential library because that program begins with Hoover forward. Jackson was too early. There are 3 privately funded presidential libraries, and then the rest, most of the rest that we're familiar with are part of the National Archives system.
But the houses of new presidents or more recent presidents, are they operated by the Park Service? Or?
Most of them are. There are only 6 presidential homes that are privately owned. We're one of them. And from Martin Van, most of the presidents from Martin Van Buren to the present, their homes are now owned by the Park Service, occasionally by a state government. But we're private. Sure.
The fact that you are privately owned, from a budgetary standpoint, how much revenue comes from what sources to take care of the facility out there?
Not enough. No, about 55% of our revenue is gate receipts, people coming for tours and events and things. 25% is earned revenue from our museum store sales and rentals, things of that nature, and then the balance is fundraising. Thank you. Oh, we don't have an endowment, by the way.
One more question.
Sir.
For the dueling events, can you bring your own firearm?
We may be independent, but we're not that independent. We provide the guns.
Howard, we very much appreciate your program. Let's give him a hand. We'd like for you to sign this book. This book is read in local schools. We normally give our speakers a pen as a gift, but we don't have any left. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Couple of ending comments. One, leave the tables and chairs in place. We do not need to move them. Larry Kane, I did ask him how we were doing in the golf tournament, and he said we just had another outstanding week. So we're moving it down the line. Keep up the good work, if you will. Larry,
whose team's winning?
Whose team's winning, he's asked.
The guy who asked the question.
It's a loaded question.
Mr. Kaplan's team is winning.
Today. Just for today. Right, guys?
I want to thank our visiting Rotarians. I want to thank Sheila for bringing our newest member in, Marie. Thank you for joining our organization. Bill, thank you for bringing your guests. Larry, we hope you come back. Jonathan, have a good trip to Seattle. If there's nothing left for the good of the club, we're adjourned.